Hello and welcome to Irish Science Fiction. My name is Brian Sexton and this is going to be chapter 39 of Nancy Goodaim, the Space Ranger. So, a hen, it's a dog, it's a tree, and away we go. European Space Agency mission specialist Catherine Bishop finished the nicest meal she had ever eaten in her life. She had eaten it from a bucket at a wooden table in a large canteen beneath the surface of Jupiter. She then stood up and walked out into a large, torchlit tunnel. A two-deep crowd of shabbily dressed, axe-carrying noobs had lined both walls of the 10-metre-wide tunnel. They were focused on a humanoid in a bright orange boiler suit. He was wielding an axe and swinging it widely in the air. Even if you have the face ripped open or have a gash cut into the torso, you need to remember that your work is not done, he announced. As I like to say, a badly injured Sosniak is still half as dangerous as a fresh Sosniak, so keep that in mind, he continued. The bright orange boiler-suited humanoid then turned to Catherine and said, Catherine, glad you're joining us. We could do with a human. Maybe you could kill Chancellor Staunton. He's one too, a human I mean. Noobs, this is another human. She knows a bit about outer space travel. Not lots, but a bit. And for those of you that weren't on the last mission, she was able to tell us that the smashed Jupiterian rocket was unfit for reuse. The noobs lining both walls of the tunnel stared at Catherine. Thank you, said one. Don't thank her too much. If she was really any good, she'd have had it up and flying again. Or else be armed with a weapon. But still, she's one of us now, noted Bip. Catherine looked at the noobs nearest her. They were a mix of ages and sizes. Their faces carried expressions that ranged from interest to confusion to exhaustion. Would it not be best for your friends to get some sleep, Bip? She asked. It might be, but then again, it might be better for them to use that time preparing for the battles that are yet to come. The battles in which we all batter the Sosniaks into pieces. So, like I was saying, injuring a Sosniak is not going to be enough. The sheriff wants them completely dismembered. I want no part in this. I'm a scientist. My work involves creation and discovery. What you're describing sounds... interrupted Cathy. And the best part of a Sosniak to dismember is their head, continued Bip, ignoring Cathy. No Jupiterian likes having their head detached from their body, and Sosniaks are no different to the rest of us in that respect. I definitely don't want any part of this, Bip. It's not normal practice on Earth for our inhabitants to butcher each other. I just want to locate the rest of my crew and return there, said Catherine. Are you telling me you are not prepared to gouge out the inner parts of Sosniaks with an axe? Asked Bip. The assembled noobs waited silently for Catherine to reply. She didn't get a chance. Fair enough, added Bip. Not everyone is cut out to fire a Tamagalodian axe into the flesh of one or more Sosniaks. I suppose I get a bit carried away as I'm deadly with one. But I take your point, Catherine. It's not for everyone. You can help in other ways. We're going to need a mending battalion when we get to Hobler Graniker. What with all the smashing and breaking of things that will surely follow our arrival. There could be where you step in. Plus, you might find enough spare bits from the broken stuff to build yourself another space rocket and head back to Earth. So, however disappointing it might be for you not to get to fire an axe into the soft flesh of a Sosniak, you can rest assured you have a purpose in the rebellion and a chance of making your way back to the third planet. So, it's a win-win, really. Bip paused and then added, Don't any of the rest of you get ideas about not battering Sosniak heads with the rock-breaking tools. Catherine here is an expert. None of the rest of you are. Now, where was I? He asked. You were saying that Sosniak's head having their heads removed from their body, suggested someone. Exactly. And in that respect, they are a lot like the rest of us, continued Bip. Keep it down out there! Yelled a voice from back inside the canteen Catherine had just left. The chef is trying to talk to the gut while sleeping, and he can't hear what the creator of the universe is saying with all the noise. Right, said Bip. I suppose it is late. He looked to Catherine, nodded, winked, and then scanned the assembled noobs lining both sides of the wide tunnel. There were about 40 of them. Bip motioned for them to sit. Right, he said as they sat. He then hunkered down himself. I don't think it's right for the Army of Darkness to be quiet, but I am not going to be the first living entity to argue with the creator of all things. Several of the noobs nodded in agreement. Several others lay back, on the compacted clay ground and rested their heads against the tunnel wall and fell asleep. It reminded Catherine that she was tired, very tired. She looked back into the canteen and saw Martina and 4 noobs busily preparing fresh buckets of food, and the sheriff laid on his back on a table in the corner. He was snoring loudly. Catherine sat on the clay ground and leant back against the tunnel wall. "Right," said Bip. "It's probably best if we finish the day with a motivational story." Catherine began to drift into a dead, exhausted sleep. Most of the noobs surrounding her had already done likewise. With the exception of one extremely haggard and aged-looking noob, only a few of the younger noobs were listening as Bip began his end-of-the-day yarn. "Sosman Borkstapel had a cousin, you know," noted Bip. "No, wait, sorry. I got that mixed up. He had a sister. Her name was Suzeman. Suzeman Borkstapel. They had the same surname, because they were brother and sisters, you know. And she loved listening to stories and magic. Yeah, it was magic she liked, and stories about magic. And while Sosman was busy stealing the ideas for the snot of Gomble, she was busy heading for Saturn. Now, I know what you're thinking. Nobody has ever gone to Saturn. Well, I'm here to tell you tonight that that's not true." Bip paused speaking to listen. He expected to hear a collective gasp. Instead, he heard snoring, and the extremely haggard, aged-looking noob say, "That's a load of schlanter. I knew both Sosman's parents when I was younger and living on the surface. Good people they were, and I can tell you for a fact that he had no sister. I know because they would ask me for advice about him. He was an only child, and they seemed to think his laziness was caused by that. They would say to me, 'Oh, what do you think?' And I'd say, 'He's just a lazy wee shite. Get him an apprenticeship.' And they did, as an apprentice greaser helping a gang of Gamelodians run the roads. But he never turned up. Laziness." "Right," said Bip for the 4th time of the night. "Thanks. And anyway, Sosman has a sister in the story." "Fair enough, but just so you know, he didn't." "Right," said Bip for a 5th time. "Anyway, where was I?" "Saturn! Sosman's sister was on her way to Saturn," suggested one of the younger noobs. Catherine half heard the suggestion. The snoring, the rambling story, and the day's traumatic exertion had lulled her into an almost sleep. Her mind gently ticked over. She was now in a world half awake and half asleep. "No, she wasn't," noted Bip. "She was inside a rocket parked in the ice rings of Saturn." Then how did she get there?" asked one of the younger noobs. "She stuck the stairs. What do you think?" snapped Bip. "In the rocket." "You never said," said another of the young noobs. "I don't have to. It's my story," said Bip. "And anyway, she got there by magic. And if you'd all just shut up and listen, I'd be able to tell ye. So anyways, Suzeman, Sosman's sister, in the story, loved outer space. Or no, rockets. And built one. No, borrowed one. Anyways, she ended up in a rocket with no clue how to work it." "Can I stop you there?" asked the extremely haggard, aged-looking noob. "Fine, but then let this be the last interruption." "Good," said the extremely haggard, aged-looking noob. "We're agreed." The tentative agreement was followed by a brief, silent pause, punctuated only by the gentle snoring of several tens of slouching and horizontal noobs. "Well?" said Bip finally. He got no response. "Right, so, if we're done with interruptions, then I'll get back to the story. And anyway, it is not a straightforward thing to pilot a space rocket through the ice rings of Saturn." "I thought you were going to stop," said the haggard noob. "I did," said Bip. "Not for long enough." "Well, how long do you want me to stop for?" asked Bip. "Infinity," replied the extremely haggard older noob. "Well, I'm not going to. And anyway, where was I?" "Talking shite," muttered the old noob. "Telling the story of Sosman Borkstapel is where I was. Now, listen." "No," said the older noob. "I wasn't talking to you. And anyway, it's not a straightforward thing to pilot a space rocket through the ice rings of Saturn, especially when you want to attack and gain control of Neptune and Pluto. And Sosman wanted to do that." "Why?" asked one of the young noobs. The corridor was now filled with snores of varying pitches and tone. "Because Sosman was a Borkstapel, and it is the nature of Borkstapels to want to control the solar system." "Bollocks," said the older noob. "What would you know about it?" "More than you. And that's no great achievement. Sosman was an only child and a bit of a dickhead who weaseled his way into power. That's all there is to it." "Everyone, don't listen to that fella," announced Pip. The everyone he announced it to consisted of 2 younger noobs, a half-sleeping European Space Agency mission commander named Catherine Bishop, and the older noob. "Arse," said the older noob. Nobody else commented. "Anyways, Sosman needed to find a way of increasing the weapons power on board the space rocket. But like I said, she was new to rocket ships. So what she did next was... "Hey, what did a lot of ye want for breakfast?" yelled a voice. It was shrill, loud and urgent, and came from Martina Ruddlesplitch. who was now standing at the entrance to Canteen RB81 and facing a corridor full of mostly slouching and snoring noobs. Her question was important to her. The night was passing quickly and she wanted to be sure she was making the necessary arrangements to ensure a smooth morning meal for the newly formed Army of Darkness. The question seemed less relevant to Bip. "Can you leave us in peace, Martina? I'm trying to motivate the Army of Darkness. They will soon have to batter and mash the hides of millions of Sosniaks and their supporters, so need a bit of encouragement. Your menu decisions can wait," he said. "They cannot!" snapped Martina. "I could care less about your Jupiterian politics. I've got a canteen to run and mouths to feed, and there is nothing more important than that. All of your pontificating and axe throwing and whatever else it is that you do won't happen if you don't eat. So whisht and let the noobs tell me what they want." "No," snapped Pip, who then went silent. "I won't," he added. "The Army of Darkness is important. The sheriff said so, and he was chatting to the creator of the universe, so you can't say fairer than that. Plus, I hate Sosman Borkstapel." Bip paused long enough for Martina to look around at the slouching, sleeping noobs and mutter a sarcastic, "Because Sosman Borkstapel is a bollocks," continued Bip. He then went silent again. "I can see there's 3 ye still awake. What do you want for breakfast?" The 2 young noobs and the 1 older noob considered the question. "What have you got?" they asked. "Food," replied Martina. "That'll do," replied the older noob. "Could you get this dope to shut up?" he added, and thrust a bony finger towards Bip. Martina ignored the request and returned to the canteen. "Anyway," continued Bip after a brief pause, "it is the nature of a Borkstapel to seek to control and manipulate the universe." "Flungelin, Duranson's cousin married a Borkstapel," said one of the 2 still listening younger noobs. "He repaired shoes." "Ah," said Bip, "you can be sure that was just a cover for Jupiterian domination. I bet he wrote down plans for taking control of the solar system in his spare time." "I don't think so. He coached the Nangaball team in his spare time. The Gorton Tor squad. They went on to win 6 Eastern Hemisphere titles. Everyone said he was gutted when Sosman outlawed Nangleball. I'm fairly sure solar system domination was never on Flungelin's agenda." "Whisht," snapped Bip. "I'm trying to tell ye about Sosman Borkstapel, who was on a space rocket in the ice rings of Saturn, with a plan to seize control of Neptune and Pluto and become their overlord. And she must have been thinking out loud, because the all-around control unit on the space rocket said, 1 Jupiterian can't take over 2 planets alone." There then followed several days of intense bickering between Sosman and the control unit. Sosman, being a Borkstapel, was especially difficult to persuade, but eventually the rocket's control unit managed to make her understand that she would need to raise some sort of army to make good her plan. So she returned to Jupiter and the citadel of Hobla Graniker with a plan and a bullshit promise of great riches to any Jupiterians willing to assist her in realising her ambitions. The result was the first Sosniak army. You could call it the first coming of Borkstapel. Now, in comparison to what we will face on the planet's surface, the first Sosniak army was tiny. A mixed bag of disaffected and greedy Jupiterian misfits numbering about 200 crowded onto the rocket and set out for Neptune, which is where the problems began. You see, 200 odd bodies on a space rocket is a lot, and 200 unwashed greedy misfits is 200 too many for an experimental spacecraft. You see, that is what they were on. Sosman had managed to find herself on an experimental prototype spacecraft, one that would use a series of physical laws in conjunction with magic. In a way, it straddled both worlds, the world of the gut and the Bongerlon and wizards and sorcery, and the world of time and gravity and the other bits and bobs the Sosniaks obsessed themselves with. Nobody really knows where the rocket was developed or why, but Sosman's thinking must have been that she was now in possession of something so powerful that no force in the solar system could resist, and that she and her collection of clapped-out misfits would rule the planets. What she didn't factor in was how mind-numbingly boring and nauseating a trip through space in a small rocket with 200 smelly Jupiterians could be. And after 6 months of travelling, they'd only made it as far as the ice rings of Saturn. And it must have been there that Sosman got a rush of blood to the head and came up with a badly thought out idea to reroute all of the rocket's weapons power to propulsion to sort of fire themselves to Neptune and cut down the amount of time they'd all spend together. The rocket, being an obliging sort of a rocket, did as she asked. Well, there was probably a bit of back and forth arguing first, but in the end it must have complied because it is still out there in the ice rings of Saturn. That was a good while back. I can't be sure, nobody can. But if I was to guess, the last conversation between Sosman Borkstapel and the rocket would have gone a little bit like this. Weapons and propulsion systems destroyed. What? Weapons and propulsion systems destroyed. How? I executed your instruction to divert all weapon power to propulsion. This destroyed our engines. Oh, why would you let that happen? I tried to warn you. That's not good enough. You should have tried harder. What is what it is. You, Susan Borkstapel, in your unquenchable thirst to manipulate and control, have destroyed the very thing that sustained you and your followers. The solar system will continue, as will life, but it will do so without you and your mates. For without power we will simply orbit Saturn until the sun becomes a red giant and superheats the structure of this ship beyond melting point. Well, obviously, you and your buddies will die shortly, what with me not being able to support life and all. But you get the idea. Now, said Bip slowly, the thing with all that is that we will never know if Susan realised her mistake, or simply starved to death wrapped in the ignorance of her own foolish pride, or was stabbed or eaten by a gang of hungry fellow Jupiterians. In any case, they're all long dead, and, you would think, the ignorant, stupid folly of Borkstapel ambition with it. But no, because she had a brother. And Sosman is every match for her ambition and greed and disregard for other life. And more, for Sosman is shrewd. Not clever, I wouldn't say clever. Shrewd. Shrewd in the way a virus morphs and adapts to spread and dominate, and decimate and kill. Shrewd in a way that does not have concern for others. I suppose you could call Sosman the second coming of Borkstapel. But this time it is not just one rocket that stands to be laid to waste. It is 9 planets and billions of lives. And it is up to us to stop them. So noobs, hear me now. We, the army of darkness, ordained by the gut through its representatives on Jupiter, who sleep thinks now in Noob Canteen RB81 in the labyrinth of Chunticle, will stand in the way of Borkstapel. Well, we will not stand in the way, more rush towards and smash with hatches. But you get the idea. Bip threw his arms towards the clay ceiling. Soon, noobs! Soon the army of darkness will leave this place for Hobbler Graniker and shine light into the dark era of Sosman. Bip glanced around the room. Everyone was sleeping. Right, I suppose we could all do with a bit of rest, he muttered. And that was it for the very early hours of the 6th day of the first human expedition to another planet. A sleeping army. Of sorts. European Space Agency Mission Commander Catherine Bishop, European Space Agency Mission Specialist Bart McMurrow, European Space Agency Mission Specialist Nancy Goodaim McGinley, Haban and Chernobyl Unterwackel, a rubbish motivational speech, a Martian waitress / astronaut called Martina Ruddlesplitch, breakfast, a crossbow, and the last remaining copy of the Book of Bongerlon, Adrift on the Sea of Uncertainty on Jupiter. Okay, thanks for listening, if you stuck with that, and fair play if you've been following this the whole way through, you have my appreciation. It's going to keep going. This was 39, so we're going up as far as 56, and there'll be another one out in 2 weeks. Apologies, this one was a small bit behind, but every so often life gets in the way, as is the way with art. But chat to you later, and thanks again for tuning in.